Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Danny Strong tackles the opioid epidemic in the new TV miniseries Dopesick, which premieres today on Hulu starring Michael Keaton. I spoke with Strong about creating the series, as well as growing up attending Quentin Tarantino's video store and starring in 90s shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Gilmore Girls, and Seinfeld, before writing HBO's Recount and Game Change, and then creating TV's Empire. Danny Strong, thanks so much for joining us on WTOP.
What's up, Jason? It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, no, you kidding? The pleasure's ours. We're talking about your brand new miniseries on Hulu, Dopesick, which hits Hulu on October 13th. Now, you and I know what it's about, obviously. You've been doing interviews on all day, but for our listeners that don't know, hit them with the premise really quick.
So this is the story of the opioid crisis, but specifically tied into the crimes of Purdue Pharma. So the show follows a U.S. attorney and his prosecutors who built a case against Purdue that was settled in 2007, and that we're also following a DEA agent who's actively trying to prevent Purdue from selling so many pills on the streets, this active investigation. We're also in the halls of Purdue Pharma as we're watching their criminal and deceptive marketing campaigns. We're watching them discuss them, devise them, and then we go from their deadly deception to a small coal town in which we see a country doctor played by Michael Keaton prescribing OxyContin to his patients because he's been lied to by a Purdue Pharma rep. So it's in telling these intertwining stories, we're hoping to tell the larger story of how the opioid crisis happens. And it's one thing, you hear about Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family, and they lied to doctors about the drug being much more addictive than they claimed. That's sort of the general understanding of what happened, and that is what happened. However, when you do a deep dive into the level of manipulation, deceit, and deception, what they went to trick doctors, it's truly shocking. It goes from independent pain societies putting out studies showing OxyContin and opioids in general are more safe than previously thought. Well, then you uncover, Purdue Pharma either financed or partially financed the entire, quote, independent pain society. You see them manipulating blood charts. You see them, these deceptive advertising campaigns that are complete lies over and over and over again. And it's extremely shocking and infuriating, and also plays as a pretty, at times, dramatic and almost exciting piece of storytelling as we're watching these prosecutors uncover all these crimes.
Oh, for sure. And you mentioned really quick, the segment with Michael Keaton in the Virginia mining town. That's going to hit home for us because, we're in the DC, Virginia, Maryland area. Remind our listeners, what town that is.
Well, it's the town's called Finch Creek, and it's a composite town. It's used to sort of represent a many Appalachian coal mining towns through southwestern Virginia, eastern Kentucky, West Virginia. We didn't want to use one specific town, right? Because we didn't want to stigmatize a town, make people feel bad about the town, but we also wanted to have this kind of universal experience of this town represents all of these towns. And so that's why we had used, Keaton's character, Dr. Phoenix. He's a composite character. He's inspired by 3 different doctors I read about, but there's even one I interviewed, but there's even more Dr. Phoenixes than just the 3. So the goal was to get as many true anecdotes and stories of abuse and addiction and how OxyContin affects people's lives and their families' lives. So we thought by creating this composite characters in this composite town, it would in some way be more truthful, because we wouldn't be trapped with one individual person's experiences. We could put in all these experiences and anecdotes into it, and it created this sort of more universal truth.
Right, exactly. I guess like the interweaving. Would you call it a mosaic? Like I know you think of like those old Altman movies, or maybe a Soderbergh Traffic or something like that. There's like interweaving storylines.
Yeah, I worry the word mosaic makes it sound kind of boring.
Right.
It is not boring, although Traffic is far from boring. Traffic's awesome. And Traffic was an inspiration for the narrative structure of the piece for sure. The intertwining stories.
Yeah, and each of those intertwining stories, I mean, you have a deep cast. We mentioned Michael Keaton, but also Peter Sarsgaard, who I just hopped off an interview with. I'll actually combine your two interviews back to back.
Okay.
But so Keaton, Sarsgaard, I mean, Caitlin Dever, Philippa Sue, so many. But just dote on your cast really fast about how much of a pleasure it was working with those.
Yeah, they're
really
amazing. They're truly amazing. It's truly the best of the best. They're so talented, and we were so lucky to have all of these incredible actors, and they're all actors. They're all actors that other actors just admire because they're at the highest level. And one of the reasons why we were able to get so many of them was when Michael Keaton said yes. So we had Michael Keaton starring and Barry Levinson directing. And then because of the subject matter, it became a project people really wanted to be a part of. And what was so great about everyone, and was just as a happy bonus, is what wonderful, intelligent, kind people they all were. There wasn't a bad apple in the group. Everyone showed up on set. They were so smart. They were so lovely to work with, and they were so passionate about the subject matter and excited to be there. So it was an incredible shoot.
Oh, for sure. And you mentioned Barry Levinson. Just talk about the collaboration between you as a writer and him as director. I mean, that guy's done it all. I mean, Diners, I still cracks me up. And Rain Man and Natural, everything. You could go on and on. But had you guys ever worked before?
We never worked together. We're friends. He was living in New York City for a long time, and we didn't live that far from each other. So we'd go have breakfast, every 3 or 4 months. And it was magic for me having breakfast with Barry Levinson 3 or 4 times a year, just getting to listen to his stories.
Wait, was it at a diner?
Yeah, I wish. That's so funny. But he's one of the greats of the last 50 years. And it's sort of endless what he's done. And there's so much sage, so much wisdom. I called him Yoda on set because he was just this Jedi master. I've never seen someone direct like that. And I directed the last 2 episodes. So to get there and be sort of attached to his waist for 4 months. So then when I went off to direct my own episodes, it was the best film school anyone could possibly ask for or imagine. I just love the guy. And, he did it. We started in October, no vaccine anywhere in sight. And he was 79 years old and came to Virginia in a mask and a shield and directed the first 2 episodes of Dopesick. It was really something to see.
A mask and a shield. Wow.
Yeah.
Hey, so I'm curious, when did you actually stumble upon Beth Macy's book? Because we should tell listeners it's based on Dopesick dealers, doctors, and the drug company that addicted America. How did you discover it? Did someone bring it to you, or I want to know that story.
Yeah, it's actually kind of one of those quirky Hollywood stories where what happened was John Goldwyn, who is a wonderful producer, came to me to write and direct a movie about the Sackler family. And so I started researching the opioid crisis and the Purdue Pharma and the Sacklers. And I thought, this is too big a story to just be about them. I wanted to see all these other elements that I discussed earlier. And then I thought it needs to be a limited series. There's just too much here. So I developed this whole show and I sold it to a studio, 20th Studios, which was part of the Disney empire. Another studio in the Disney empire, Fox 21, not knowing about my project, goes and buys the book Dopesick in a bidding war. And I read about it on Deadline Hollywood, and I couldn't believe it that there was a rival project in my own studio. It was surreal.
Right.
And so then they realized this huge mistake that had happened, and they asked us to team up. So I read Beth's book, and I thought it was a wonderful book. Then I met with Beth, and she's just an incredible person. I call her National Treasure, Beth Macy. And I just agreed to just bring her book and her into the fold. And she was in the writer's room, and she was a wonderful collaborator on the project.
Awesome. Wow. That is wild.
Yeah.
Deadline. See, it pays to read deadline.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine just reading,
Yeah.
oh, well, now here's a big problem.
Like, well, okay. All right. My
Yeah.
day just changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, remind our listeners real quick, where you grew up and how you got in this racket to begin with. I know it was, Manhattan Beach, California, I guess, but is it true that, as a kid you went to Tarantino's video store and rented movies from him?
That was my video store when I was 11 years old. I would go because I was into adult movies, and by adult movies, I don't mean porno movies. I mean,
Yeah,
adult
clarify that really
adult
quick.
themed movies. Yeah, yeah, I love 70s movies and Hitchcock movies, and so my mom knew that, and there was this avant-garde video store, so she started taking me to the avant-garde video store, and there was the video store clerk was this really outgoing, kind of quirky, dynamic guy named Quentin. And I loved him, and I spent so much time with him. They were talking to him. They nicknamed me Little Quentin, and so they'd say, "Quentin, Little Quentin's here," and I'd go in. And then my mom, at a certain point, she was like, "Why do you spend so much time talking to Quentin?" Like, because I love Quentin. He's great,
Wow.
and he would recommend all these crazy movies for me to watch. So I had this warped film school at the age of 11 from a 24, 25-year-old Quentin Tarantino.
That's so wild. That is so
Yeah,
wild. I
yeah,
love that you
crazy.
knew him back with just Quentin, and you were just, the young kid Danny coming in. That's so wild
Yeah.
how history works
Well,
out.
I was 11 and 12 because went over a few years, but I looked like I was 7 or 8 years old. So it was part of what everyone got such a kick out of. And Quentin knew my real age, but everyone just thought it was just so weird seeing what they thought was a 7-year-old, talking about Truffaut and Michael Cimino. It was like this really kind of strange thing for other people in the video store.
Yeah, you're probably one of the few who, with the 400 blows, you're the same age as the kid.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Cool. Well, then of course, before we run, my listeners will kill me if I don't ask about some of those early acting, because you sort of backdoored into writing and directing. First, you were an actor. You were Jonathan on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and then
I was.
the boyfriend Doyle on Gilmore Girls. Just memories of those two shows really fast. I mean, you're part of TV history from acting side alone.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's so incredible that those shows are so beloved and iconic. And I didn't see that happening while we were on the air. We weren't, neither show was a massive hit at the time, or even, they had some pop culture cred. They were seen sort of as teen shows. And then over the years, they've become beloved pieces of Americana entertainment. And, I'm so proud to have been a part of them. And it was, both of them were wonderful experiences for me. Just getting to spend my 20s acting on these two unbelievable shows. And, during my 20s, I was a pounding the pavement actor, just trying to get any job I could. Commercials, radio voiceovers, animation voiceover. Occasionally I'd get a film audition. Yeah, once every 3 months I'd get a film audition. Right? That was the sacred thing that I could never get. Although I would end up booking one of them, so I would do one movie a year as well during all this. So it wasn't easy, to be honest with you, and that's why I started writing, because of the psychological toll it took on me getting rejected all year long. Either they didn't want me to audition, they didn't want to give me a call back, or they didn't want me for the part. I mean, that was what I heard all year. So I actually started writing as almost this therapy to just get my mind off all this rejection that was occurring all year.
Oh, for sure. And in your writing, politics has really been a bit of a through line for you. I mean, maybe you didn't mean to at first, but it sort of has been, from, the game change thing, Recount, and then, even writing the screenplay for The Butler, the Forrest Whitaker, and all the different times of his experiences throughout the years in the White House. Why do you think, I mean, draw that through line for me. What have you just always been interested in politics?
Yeah, it's funny. It is strange because I don't have a background in politics. I don't have a background in journalism. I was just someone who was informed, but I wasn't even following the day-to-day machinations of Washington, D.C. But I would read up on what was going on, but it made me so angry. I was so enraged by the politics of the time, particularly the march into the Iraq War. There was something about it that just that just, it enraged me. And I stayed angry for years because of the Iraq war. And I felt that we were completely lied to, that Saddam Hussein clearly had nothing to do with 9/11. And now our government and then the media just started backing that narrative that Saddam Hussein was responsible for 9/11. And I felt like I'm not an expert on any of this. And I know it was Al-Qaeda. I know that Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with it. So it was just this big lie. So then when I had been writing these comedies and they weren't successful, I saw a play about the buildup to the Iraq war, the exact thing that had made me so enraged and fired up for so many years. And the war was still going on at the time. I mean, it went on for years. And when I walked out of the theater, I thought, and the play was called Stuff Happens by David Hare. It was about the buildup to the Iraq war. I walked out of the theater and I said, that's what I have to do. I have to write something like that, not these comedies that no one are buying from me.
Right.
And the first idea that popped into my head within 30 seconds of me making that decision that I need to write something like Stuff Happens was the Florida Recount. It was just like, boom. Well, what about the Florida Recount? Maybe you could do Stuff Happens with the Florida Recount.
Right.
And it was crazy because Hollywood couldn't have been any less interested in a story like that at the time. The only place that was interested that I could have sold it was HBO. And they had this reputation for being, very elite and very, very snobby in the writers they hired. And I had never even written a drama before. So, it was Tony Kushner or David Hare. Those were the types of writers that they wanted to work with. So the whole thing seemed kind of crazy to pursue, but I didn't care because once I started researching it, I thought this is the most incredible story I've come across in years. And then lo and behold, I sold the project to HBO. They bought it as a pitch. I wrote it. They loved the script. And then 8 weeks after I turned it in, it was greenlit with Sidney Pollack attached to direct. So it was, sort of that, it's the sort of follow your bliss kind of moment of follow your passion. And then it totally changed my life.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. Everyone go back and check out Recount. And then of course, Game Change. And then we mentioned The Butler too, but with Lee Daniels. But then you and Lee Daniels, before we run, you guys, of course, co-created one of the most successful TV shows as well, Empire. Talk about just the creation of that whole show and those iconic characters. I mean, Cookie Lyons and Lucius are famous.
Yeah. It's so crazy how it all came together. So we were in post-production on The Butler. And Lee Daniels kept telling me, he's like, what are we doing next? We're magic together. We have to do something next together. And I said, well, let me figure something out. Let me just think about it. So I had flown back to Los Angeles because I lived in New York and was driving around, and there was a radio news piece on a deal Sean Combs had just closed. And it was this huge deal. It was something like an $80 million deal. And I just thought, wow, hip hop is so dynamic and wildly entertaining. And there's so much, social discussion within the world of hip hop. Why isn't there a mainstream hip hop movie? And then I thought, well, how would I do that if I did it? And I immediately thought of this play I love called The Lion in Winter. And
oh my God, one of the greatest movies ever too, man. That
movie, one of my
look it up right
movies.
now. Oh my God.
Yeah. And then King Lear, which The Lion in Winter is a King Lear story.
Sure.
And I thought, well, why don't I do this like The Lion in Winter or King Lear? And then the whole idea kind of flooded into my head in about 90 seconds using those archetypes. So Cookie Lion was inspired by Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Wow. I never knew that.
Hip hop Eleanor of Aquitaine. And then I flew back to New York about a week later, met with Lee, and just pitched him this concept of doing King Lear in a hip hop empire. And he just loved it. And then he said to me, shouldn't we do this as a TV show instead of a movie? And I said, yes, it's like Black Dynasty. And he just started screaming in the Lee Daniels way, yes, darling, yes, it's Black Dynasty, darling. And that was the birth of Empire.
Wow. Well, there you go. If you're a fan of Empire, everybody go back and check out Lion in Winter and King Lear. There you go. Yeah. Wow. All right. Final before we wrap it around to Dopesick. But I do want to know, I know our listeners will be interested in, you writing that 2-part finale to the Hunger Games, Mockingjay. Was that daunting when they tell you to do that? That's such a popular, franchise, books and movies. How did you approach saying, you know what, this is too much for one movie? I need to divide it into two if I'm going to bring this home properly.
Yeah, that wasn't my decision at all. They had already decided that when they were looking for a writer.
Okay.
So they had decided they were going to turn the last book into 2 movies. And that was sort of what was happening with those franchises at the time. I think Twilight did it. And there was one other big franchise.
Harry Potter. Yeah.
Yeah. Harry Potter, right. Had just done it. So they were on the hunt for a writer for it. And they reached out to 10 writers to quote, pitch on it, to see if they'd be interested in pitching. And I'll be honest with you, I was just flattered to be one of the writers they reached out to see if I wanted to pitch. I just thought, wow, how cool is that I'm in that group. And it was, kind of the most sought after writing job of that time. The first film had already come out and it was a huge hit. So I literally just, I hadn't even read the book yet. So I read the book and then I came up with sort of how I would do the 2 movies. I came up with sort of the thematic through line of it. But at the same time, they really wanted it to be very close to the book because the book is excellent and the fans love the book. So it was an unusual job in trying to get as much of the book in, but at the same time, it's an adaptation. You can't get all the book in. It's not physically possible. So,
Right.
So what do you do? And so it was, it was a very challenging job, but I was honored to be part of the franchise. And that was my Hunger Games 3 and 4 experience.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for, all of those detours into other work, but
No,
everyone,
my pleasure.
check out Dopesick for sure. I guess what's the final sell on it? What do you hope people will take away from it? Obviously, the opioid epidemic is just ravaging the country right now. What do you think people are getting enlightened by watching this?
I think that there are 2 things that I would really love it if people could take away. I would love it if there was, I view the show as the trial that Purdue Pharma never got, so that there would be a visceral, intellectual understanding by anyone who watches this show exactly what Purdue Pharma did, so that their crimes could be documented in a piece of mainstream entertainment. That was one, so that the victims of the opioid crisis, the family members of victims, could have an understanding of what happened to them or what happened to their loved ones in real detail that you actually watch. The other thing that I'm hoping people get out of it is that it offers solutions to paths forward, to destigmatize medical assisted treatments that are extremely effective in treating opioid use disorder. So that once again, the relatives and loved ones and friends of people that have opioid use disorder know what's going on with them. So they know that their brain chemistry has been literally changed by the drug, that their frontal lobe has been damaged. And that is why they can't not take it. That's why they feel intense pain when they don't have the drug, which is what Dopesick. That's what Dopesick means, that pain you feel when you don't have the drug. So if there could be this increased understanding and an increased acceptance of therapies, it could hopefully be some sort of effective path at moving forward and beyond this crisis.
Wow. So there you go. So Dopesick is sort of another word for like withdrawal then.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Well, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate everything. And we encourage our listeners to check it out. October 13th, Dopesick miniseries on Hulu. Danny Strong, it's been a pleasure. I will have to end. My sign off line is a Seinfeld reference. Thanks for the picks, Vincent.
For some of my relatives, it never got bigger than when I was Vincent on the Vincent's Picks episode of Seinfeld. I've never surpassed that from many a relative.
It was the comeback, right? Like where you're offering your own critics picks at a video store, right? On the video.
Yes. Maybe I was channeling Quentin Tarantino when I was playing Vincent from my childhood.
There you go. Quentin inspired Vincent. There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for doing this. This was a blast.
Jason, thanks. It was a riot. I really appreciate it. Take care.
I also spoke with Dopesick star Peter Sarsgaard about why he took the role, as well as memories of his great journalism role in Shattered Glass. Hey, Peter, thanks so much for joining us on WTOP.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, I've been a fan of your work for a long time, but let's talk about your latest work, Dopesick, which premieres on Hulu on Wednesday, October 13th. Now, you and I know what it's about, but for the benefit of our listeners, just give them the quick premise really quick.
Well, this is about the opioid crisis, that the part of it that was involved OxyContin, that the Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family were largely responsible for creating, and looks at the issue from a variety of perspectives, from the attorneys who prosecuted the case, to users, to DEA agent, to a doctor who prescribed it, and really gets at the story from all these multiple viewpoints, where they overlap a bit in a very kind of tense, compelling narrative over the course of 8 episodes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And for us here being a DC station, there are a little bit of local ties to our area. Obviously, you know, there's stuff in the DEA, you know, sort of the more government stuff. But there's also a Virginia right nearby, Virginia mining community that's affected. Explain.
That's right. I mean, that was sort of ground zero for the origin of this epidemic. They targeted this community largely because they believed it would be a place that would be fertile ground for such a drug. And it unfortunately really proved to be, and it kind of went all the way up through Ohio. I actually, in 2016, did a documentary short as part of a series for Epics with Norman Lear producing, where I went and met, users and dealers, and drove around with police officers and hung out with families, all who were affected by this drug.
Cool. Well, tell me about your character. What made him so juicy to play? You know, Rick Mountcastle. Why? What was he so fun to sink your teeth in?
Well, you know, the joy of playing Rick Mountcastle was, first of all, I rarely get offered a part like this, where it was, it's a David and Goliath story. It's these small town lawyers who were attacking, or prosecuting one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the United States for just all kinds of neglect and malfeasance. And it was very, very tricky for them to figure out a way to go at this case. And so I was really flattered that Danny approached me. A lot of the time, I would be offered the other part. So I remember one of the first things he said when he was talking about it is, he was like, "You'd be a good guy. You'd be a really good guy." And actually, I would say, having met Rick Mountcastle now after I did it, I am really flattered to play someone who is such an honorable person.
That's cool. And then tell me about working alongside, the cast is very deep, but I mean, especially Michael Keaton. I mean, did he bring some of that spotlight investigative mojo with you? Now you're investigating another company, but what was it like working with him?
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing about this show is that, like, Rosario is kind of in her part, and Michael Keaton's in his part, Stolberg's in his part. Like, we all have our own little sections, and I actually only overlapped with Michael Keaton in one scene. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't even quite like we were in the same scene. We were in the same courtroom, and we must have glanced at each other once or twice. And that was a bit of heartache. I really, really am a huge fan, have been since I was a kid. I mean, my kids were raised on Beetlejuice. So, and I mean, what an incredible talent, what an incredible intellect also.
Oh yeah, you're right. He'll always be Beetlejuice. He'll always be our Batman too. For those of us of a certain age.
Beetlejuice.
Cool. Had you read the book, Beth Macy's book? What was it called? Dopesick, Dealers, Doctors, and the Drug Company That Addicted America. Had you read that before, or only after you got the role, then you doubled back and did your due diligence?
So yeah, when I was offered the part, I ended up shortly thereafter making a movie with my wife in Greece, on an island in Greece. And this is in the heart of first phase of COVID. So I was in Greece from August to November doing this movie with my wife. And I listened to the author read the book, which was, I mean, sometimes I will kind of go back and forth with a book. I'll read some and I'll listen to some just so I can plow through it quickly while I'm doing something else. And once I started listening to her read her own work and the passion that she had for the subject, which was so evident in her reading of it. There was no other way to go about it. It was it's a really, really compelling listen, and I highly recommend it.
So you did the old audiobook trick there in the Vacation in Greece. I love it.
Well,
cool.
not vacation, workation.
Working, which we know is never really a vacation.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, then, so it was this book, but then, Danny Strong, who had to, Empire and Game Change and Recount and all the list goes on and on. But he was the one who had to, adapt this thing as the creator of this miniseries and writer of it. What do you think was, just dote on him, make him blush on why he was such the right man for the job to bring what was on the page to the, or in your case, the audiobook to the screen. How good did he translate it?
Well, it's like, it was not immediately obvious how you'd go about doing this. I mean, it's a book filled with all these multiple narratives, some of which overlap, but, I think that it's kind of in the model of the movie Traffic.
Mm-hmm.
If you've seen that, the way
Soderbergh.
Yeah, exactly. The way that those narratives interweave. There is, to me, no finer showrunner that I have ever worked with or know of in Hollywood than Danny Strong. And you may know him from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but he's also quite an actor. But talking to him and hearing his level of understanding about the subject was absolutely one of the things that made me do it. And even while we were working, sometimes, you're shooting these things in such a crazy order, and I would get a little lost, or I wouldn't quite understand, some of the complicated machinations of what was going on. And he always knew the person, the law, what exactly it was we were fighting for, why we couldn't do this and could do this as lawyers. I mean, it was like, it was awesome. And, in shows like this that do have a lot of information, the tendency is to saddle the actors with all of it and just have them kind of explain to another character what that character would already know so that the audience will pick it up. And I think we did almost none of that. And yet he writes this in such a way that you really glean what's going on in a completely natural way that I don't think requires a lot of homework or effort from an audience that's probably not ready for that.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I mean, he's one of the titans of the industry, so it's really cool. It's cool to hear that, with all these moving pieces of interweaving storylines, if you can get lost as an actor of where exactly you are, or what law are we talking about, it's kind of cool that he has it all, in his head and can just spit it right out. That's
I
a really
pretend
cool tidbit
for a living,
Yeah.
So for some reason, everybody, I was cast last year to play a politician, a lawyer, a professor, a famous professor of Italian literature. All these are jobs that I would not have in life.
But you get to dabble in a little of each. That's why
I was the worst student you could ever possibly imagine.
Definitely. What was it like, real quick, working? We mentioned Danny Strong, but working with Barry Levinson was directing too. I mean, man, I could go on and on about Diner and The Natural and Rain Man and everything. I mean, the guy's done it all. But what was sort of his working with him up close and personal? What was sort of his, I guess, gift?
Yeah. So I had done a film with him, which actually is going to come out on HBO, I think, relatively soon.
Oh, what's it called?
That one is now called Survivor.
Okay.
It's about the boxer Harry Haft, who was in the Holocaust. He was in a prison camp and made to box other Jews for the sport and entertainment of Nazi guards.
Oh my God.
And he survived.
That is and we've all heard of the more allegorical, Joe Louis Max Schmeling, knocking out Hitler on more of a symbolic level. But this, oh my God, that is it's as real as it gets.
He made it back to the States, and he ended up fighting Rocky Marciano.
Holy cow.
Ben Foster plays that role, and I play the reporter who's sort of tracking the story. And so I knew him from that.
Right.
And this is one of the greatest guys to work for. There's a reason that Al Pacino comes back for more and Robert De Niro comes back for more. He really makes actors feel comfortable. He's an inspiring guy. He's a very fast moving director. Like, hold on, because you're going to be done at 3:00 in the afternoon. He just knows what he wants and knows how to shoot it. To me, it's just like, if I could do Barry Levinson movies every year, I would.
Yeah, the combo of Barry Levinson and Danny Strong. That you can't get much better than that. If that's not enough to check out Dopesick, I don't know what. Get the Hulu subscription now for those two alone. Well, cool. Well, I know we're short on time, but before we go, I really just on a personal level need to thank you. You know, as a journalist, you know, we grew up loving Shattered Glass. It's like they show that in, you know, our J schools and stuff all the time. But memories of that really quick. I won't ask you to go through your whole filmography, but just this one role, man. I mean, I thought you were so dang good in that, and you wanna trust Hayden Christensen's character so much. You want to be there, but as you piece it together, that's like a heartbreaking role sort of to play, you know?
Yeah, well, yet another job I would never really have in life. When I did that documentary in Dayton, I realized how terrible I was at asking questions and coming up with questions to ask people. But yeah, I showed up for that meeting about that job with Billy Ray, who's an incredible guy. Like, to me, he is the baseball coach of directors. He's like the guy that's like, he's got a real baseball coach vibe.
Oh, underrated too, because he wrote Captain Phillips and Richard. Like, he's underrated, if you ask me.
We're talking. Yeah. I mean, not in my mind he's underrated. In my mind he's like. But I showed up that audition having just arrived from Costa Rica, where I'd spent the last 6 weeks. I was in flip-flops. I looked like a complete dirtbag. And somehow he decided that I could play this role. And again, that was like a role a little bit like this one, in that I'm playing someone who really is after the truth. And there's a detective quality, like putting together information and trying to find out the truth and reveal the truth. That's always going to be really enticing as an actor. And Rosario Dawson, who's in this, was also in it. Yeah, I remember there's one scene in that movie where I blow up at Chloe Sevigny, like and it's kind of toward the end of the film. And we had shot the whole film, and I'd kept it buttoned up the whole time. I was just playing a guy who never loses his shit. And we actually went back and added that scene just because the director was like, Billy was like, I need to see you lose it. The audience is going to lose their minds if you never let your feelings out. We've watched you bite your tongue for 2 hours. It's got to come out. And, you know, that's why I try to work with smart people.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, your reputation precedes you, man. Shattered Glass, Garden State, Jarhead. I mean, it goes on and on and on. I even like Black Mass a lot. I mean, everything, man. So anyway,
I love my role in Black Mass. That was a really fun part to play.
I think it needs to be held up with the among the best gangster flicks. I feel like, I mean, it got good reviews, but I just feel like, I don't know, for whatever reason, sort of get lost in the shuffle a little when people start ranking the good gangster movies. But that one was so good.
Yeah, he's a great director.
Yeah, Scott.
Mr. Cooper.
Yeah. Well, anyway, but the latest one, Dopesick, check it out. It premieres on Hulu October 13th. And yeah, seriously, it was a treat getting to chat with you. You know, I think you're one of the best at your craft out there. So keep up the good work, sir.
Thank you, buddy. Be well.
We'll talk to you later.
Bye now.
Thanks so much for joining us on Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Remember to hit the subscribe button and give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time. I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the DC area is great, and Podcast DC gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast DC.